Today I figured what I should do is show you everything that I've been working on in the garden. I've been working on this, I guess we did all the groundwork for this last year. It was just a case of bulldozing everything that was in the garden, ripping up everything, and then putting down wood chips, building up the soil. As I've said before, the soil in our garden is garbage. So what I've been doing over the last year is just gradually building it up. We've got a really good set of compost bins now. So we've been making our own compost. In this case, for this year, we had to buy a fair amount of compost. But hopefully in subsequent years, between the compost bins that we already have and the wormery that I'm going to get, we shouldn't need to do that. But this is all the kind of preliminary work that we want to do now. And then once it's done, hopefully we've set ourselves a really good kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Foundation, there we go, for everything else to grow really well over the next few years. So this is the garden. There's still a few things that we need to clean up. Over here we have the polytunnel, but I'll do a different video for that another day. For the moment you can just see the tomatoes which are growing in there. But this is my area. The polytunnel is more corazones, and because we live next to a loud road, I'm just going to do voiceover for the next part. The first thing you see when you walk outside the door is the social area of the garden. We didn't want to take up the whole garden with growing fruit and veggies. We do have two little ones, and it wouldn't be really fair to just occupy the whole space with all the stuff that we wanted to grow. So we've kind of cut up the garden into sections. There's the social part, there's the veggie, well, the polytunnel with all the herbs growing next to it, and then there's this area which is eventually going to be for my quail cage. As you can see, the comfrey, and this one is the Russian comfrey, has gone absolutely ballistic, which we're very, very pleased about. It's such a useful plant to have in the garden. And then right behind the compost bin, this is where I'm trying to grow a whole load of nettles. There are some coming up. I planted some roots down there, I think, at the beginning of last year, and stuff is finally starting to come up, but I'm just going to have to regularly go through that and pull up all the other plants that are growing there until I get a really good patch of nettles. And if you're wondering, Claire, why on earth would you plant nettles? I drink this tea a lot since I get anemic very, very easily. It's an absolutely fantastic soup, and it's one of the most useful plants to have if you're trying to make plant food other than the comfrey. But this is the area where the quail are going to go, and it's quite wide. It will be nicely nestled in between the workshop, which is Corazons, and the polytunnel, which is kind of Corazons' project, but I'll do a different video about that later. For the moment, the main focus of this video is this part of the garden, which is my veggie part of the garden. At the moment, this is still very much in the early stages. I've got a few raised beds. I'm going to eventually get 2 more raised beds, but I'm going to be having pots full of flowers everywhere. I have this lovely pot over here, which I got a few days ago, and then there is going to be a lavender pot going on the post opposite that my mother's given me. And I'm just gradually going to build up all these plants that will be really good for any kind of butterflies, bees, bumblebees. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing how it's going to look in a few months. These raised beds, although I could have planted directly in the soil, I didn't want to for several reasons. It helps avoid a lot of bugs, especially the kind of bugs which will go for things like carrots, but also having it off the ground is always a lot easier on the back. And as someone who gets ill very quickly, anything which is going to be a little bit easier on my body is great. Now the apple trees, this is the part where it gets exciting. It's going to take about 4 years. As you can see, there's 4 wires, and we're going to be training these to grow up along this in an espalier style. So we're not really going to get any fruit out of this for 3 years. The 3rd year is when you start to get fruit, and the 4th year is when you can comfortably harvest this. But because it's grown in such a confined space, it's very, very efficient. And at the moment, the garlic's over here in these pots. It won't be there permanently. I did have to move it from this corner next to the fence because it's right underneath the gutter, and it got far too much water and it was not happy, so I raised it up on these bricks. But eventually I'll be doing a completely different system for the onions. Sorry, not for the onions, for the garlic. But for the moment, they're just in the bucket and they're growing beautifully, and I'm really looking forward to tasting them in a few months. Then over here we have some mizuna. This is a Japanese lettuce which is absolutely delicious. I never thought I'd be that kind of person who will just pick a leafy green and eat it like that, but hey, here we are. I'm very much enjoying it. Then there's some experimental chickpeas that I'm trying to grow, and this area which I've had to cover in chicken wire and lilandai is because everyone in our neighbourhood has cats, and they see my raised bed as a lovely litter box. So they've destroyed most of my leeks, they've destroyed most of the beans, and at the moment this is all over that just to stop them from turning it into a litter box. On the opposite bed, I've had to put shredded lilandii all over it to stop them going into it. They hate the texture, so they fortunately leave it alone. But otherwise, other than the Shirley Pixies tomatoes, I have quite a few marigolds in here. These ones are going to be very interesting. This isn't a variety we've grown, but so far, even though they look like they're quite stressed, they feel fantastic. So hopefully they'll do as well as the Roma, which we have currently growing in the polytunnel. Then over here we have another bucket, which I'm hoping to fill either with a lavender or a flower. We have 2 blueberry bushes over here, and then over on this side what we have is a bush blackberry. Now this isn't the kind of blackberry that you'll see along canals which just takes over everything. This is a much more structured blackberry. And then these blocks over here that you can see are going to move over onto this side, which will be a raised water butt which will connect water from the shed. And then eventually what I'm hoping to have is a vertical growing garden up on the fence for things like strawberry and lettuce. I'm not going to have anything up to here, it's just the top part of the fence where I want that guttering system to be installed, so that way I can grow strawberries and lettuce, because those bushes are going to eventually grow up at a certain height and I don't want to be scrambling behind them. Over here I've had to do 2 different varieties of thyme. I think it's common thyme and golden thyme. This one I think is golden thyme, and then the other one is common thyme, and I've had to stick a whole load of sticks in here to stop the cats from getting into it. And if you're wondering why there's glass in this, it's because unfortunately we bought a load of compost that is utter trash. It's full of plastic and glass and broken Tupperware, and I'm not impressed. So we're actually returning it, and to be fair, the company that we bought it from was very good. They were quite horrified, and they're going to be picking all of this up and getting some good compost for us, and we've bought from them before, but the faster it gets here the better, because the potatoes are ready to go into the potato buckets. We did this method last year, it worked well, but we're hoping we can make it work better this year. As much as I would like to think that I can put tons of veggies into the raised beds this year, I don't think that's going to happen because we're still very much at the preparation stages. This is one of the longer raised beds that I got, and as you can see, there's a modular system so you can make it different sizes, but with the previous raised beds I got, which are exactly the same as this one, I saved some of the extra panels that came with that, so eventually I can make a really long raised bed which would go down the middle of the veggie garden. And the reason I want this is for anything where we're going to need a lot of a certain vegetable growing. I'm not going to make the mistake of putting squash anywhere that's kind of precious, because squash just takes over everything. So I'm going to be putting this in corners, possibly around the quail area eventually. So this will be for things like leek. One of my concerns with a longer raised bed is that it might not have the support that it needs, so I'm worried that it might buckle in the middle. So for the moment at least, I'm going to put 2 large stumps on either side that are very solid, they're not going anywhere. And it's just a nice seating area for the veggie garden, and I can also put some pots with things growing in it as well. What I'm going to need to do next, because this is a hugel culture method, is I need to cut up the weed-proof membrane, which I have underneath all this wood chip. This was something that was quite important to Corazon to have, and it's not my hill to die on, so fine. So I'm going to be cutting up the weed-proof membrane, which is directly underneath that raised bed, because I want all the worms to be able to get into there and create a beautiful, healthy soil. Then logs are going to go in there, compost, leftover food scraps, things like veggie peels, potato peels, things like that, to build up a really healthy raised bed. Before I forget, one of the things that I've been doing on these 2 smaller raised beds, and eventually will go on all of them, is some copper tape all around it. The reason I put the copper tape here is that snails and slugs really hate copper. It basically burns them. At the moment I've just got 1 strip which goes around them, but I'm eventually hoping to have 2 or even 3 just to stop them before they even get into the raised bed. And then over here, this is where my mushroom area is going to be after I've put 2 more raised beds there. So I'll be doing shiitake mushrooms, pink oyster mushrooms, and then they're going to be wine cap mushrooms growing directly in the wood chips. There are so many different things that I could share, but I'm going to just keep it to the things that I've actually done today for the most part, because otherwise I'll be talking here forever. This is how the garden is going so far, and hopefully I'll have a new update for you within a few months.